I think regeneration in its new Labour form entailed, like most of New Labour, the attempt to realise social democratic goals via Thatcherite means. So the idea, I think, was to bring the middle classes back into the centre of cities, largely. Something which may have succeeded to some degree in the centre of Manchester, certainly succeeded in London, but I think mostly had fairly desultory effects. But the idea, I think, was to get rid of that kind of spatial segregation that Britain has been suffering from for about 150 years, really. You know, the affluent have never really, with the exception of like Scotland and maybe some areas of London, the affluent have never lived in cities or in the centre of cities in the UK. They've always gone straight for the suburbs. And so I think regeneration boils down really to let's get the middle classes and let's get investment back into the centre of cities. I think the central problem with that was that meant accepting a situation which had occurred through the 80s and 90s, in which working class areas and working class housing had been dilapidated and poorly treated and so on and so forth. And the only solution to this seemed to be, first of all, let's get doctors and stockbrokers living next door to these people because that will make them better. And secondly, that will then lead to a trickle-down effect. And trickle-down economics is one of the greatest kind of economic fantasies, I think, of the last century, really. It's an astonishing myth. I think if there's anywhere that really represents the Blairite landscape, the kind of landscape of regeneration at its fullest extent, this is one of the best places to do it. On the one hand, you've got the Millennium Dome, you've got your kind of big Blairite grand project, actually a project of the John Major government, although quite enthusiastically picked up by Peter Mandelson, by Blair himself. An area which originally had quite a lot of interesting ideas. Initially the idea was you'd reach the Dome only by public transport, for instance. So you have a Jubilee line extension here, a bus station, and yet you look around here and you've got car park after car park after car park. Now, this kind of idea of having, this new kind of European landscape of easy public transport and so forth, it stalls really, really early on. And yet there's little fragments of it. Just down that way you've got the Greenwich Millennium Village, one of those kind of prototypical Blairite mixed communities where most of it is very expensive private flats for Canary Wharf workers. You've also got Canary Wharf itself just over there, the kind of, I think, the symbol of the financial boom, and I guess, given that Lehman Brothers' offices in the UK just over there, the symbol of its collapse. You've got kind of acres of luxury flats on former industrial land, and you've got the eventual transformation of this into something which I think initially wanted to be a version of continental Europe. Of kind of sustainable environmental architecture and good public transport and a mix of different people living in the same areas, to, I guess, a sort of botched thing somewhere between that and the USA. The Dome is now, the O2, a kind of Las Vegas style Enormo Dome, ringed by car parks, ringed by flyovers, and you've got the kind of total kind of giving over of an area that was formerly industrial to the service industry. Because the current government have abandoned, I guess, the idea of urban regeneration, partly because they're not an urban party. Apart from the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, there's very few inner city areas that ever have voted Tory or really ever will. So I think they're going back to their comfort zone, it's interesting that the kind of localism stuff has been combined with the return of the enterprise zone, and I think that shows what localism really is. I think a few people seem to have the idea that localism is this kind of passport to Pimlico, kind of farmers markets and cottage industries thing. And I think it's quite deceptive. I think what localism is part of a kind of many-pronged assault on the planning system, partly as a way of getting the building industry and the kind of property boom and the whole grim bloody process starting all over again. And they don't want to do it via the means of Kickstart. They don't want to do it by throwing money in. And I think what the idea is, if you just lift planning regulations and make it very, very cheap to build, make it very, very low tax, then stuff will happen. And it's kind of ironic to do it here, because we're opposite one of the only enterprise zones that was ever really successful. Most of them, you know, entailed sort of grim ex-urban sort of retail sheds and, you know, business parks, most of which just shunted jobs from one end of the country to the other. I think in terms of actually solving unemployment, they were massively unsuccessful, and they'll have much the same effect. They're not about solving unemployment. They're not really about localism. It's about you know, trying to kind of provide incentives for British business, because we have a private sector that's absolutely moribund, and you know, it's another way of using public sector measures to get them going again, I think.